there has been a second explosion here in Manhattan.
September 11th is a day and date seared into everybody's memory. From here in New York City to Canada and beyond, it's the day the world changed. Well, now 10 years later, we're back here in New York looking back at those tragic events, talking to the people impacted by them and hearing some of their incredible stories from that terrible day. As the Twin Towers burned and thousands of frightened people raced away from the buildings, New York City firefighters were heading in and up. They had no idea what to expect, and as the towers came down one at a time, 343 members of the FDNY died. Their incredible efforts to save the lives of those trapped in the tower's top floors made them instant heroes. And to this day, when New York City firefighters are called to action, people pay attention. This call was triggered after smoke was found in the subway system. It wasn't that serious, but the crew suited up and were ready to go down just in case. In the meantime, people on the street used the opportunity to have their picture taken with some of the firefighters, who happily stand and smile as the cameras click and the people take turns. It's clear they're proud of their job and the admiration that comes with it. Outside the firehouse at the base of where the Twin Towers once stood, an iron sculpture on one side of the building depicts the heroic actions of the crews that day as the towers burned. Flowers are left out of respect and remembrance, and people take more pictures. There's no chance the firefighters lost on 9/11 will ever be forgotten. And while it's safe to say every firefighter in New York City has a memory of the attack and brutal aftermath, getting them to talk about it is difficult. Multiple requests for interviews are denied. We're told the firefighters are talked out and that it's too emotional and painful for many to discuss.
These are my ID tags that I wore at the Trade Center.
Right.
This was a special hat given to recovery workers that worked a long time at the Trade Center.
Since getting firefighters to talk is nearly impossible, we met the man who had exclusive access to Ground Zero in the aftermath of 9/11. Gary Marlin Susan became the official photographer for Ground Zero for the Uniformed Firefighters Association. And with the hundreds of pictures and artifacts he took and collected from the scene, 6 years ago he opened the Ground Zero Museum workshop.
This is a well-known artifact that was found in the subway tunnels at Ground Zero, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Very powerful, iconic.
The museum is full of dozens of other powerful and iconic pieces from 9/11 too. From the amusing, like the hundreds of German beer cans found wedged between the steel beams and the tower debris from when it was built, to a piece of something that took the towers down.
This is an actual piece of fuselage from American Airlines Flight 11.
Oh, really? That's what that is?
Yeah, it's a piece of the wing of the first plane that hit the North Tower.
The pain of the aftermath is something Susan will never forget, and his photos document the days and months at Ground Zero during the 9 months it took to clear the site and to try and find and honor the remains of as many firefighters and victims as possible.
I was there 19 hours per day, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. I lived at Ground Zero. I slept at St. Paul's Church. It became my home. And so it was definitely a life-changing, life-altering experience for both myself and all of us that had the honor to work there.
You must have seen some things that you probably wish you hadn't seen, or probably, try not to forget. How do you deal with what you've seen and now what you know?
Well, I mean, I'm much better now. Several years ago, I was not okay. I'm not trained as a medic or a paramedic or a cop or a fireman. I'm just a normal civilian. And so I did, witness human remains on a daily basis.
Susan underwent 3 years of therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder to get him to what he describes now as fairly normal. Gives you a sense of what the firefighters who worked around the clock at Ground Zero went through and continue to deal with every day. An evening stop at the firehouse known as Bowery U, home to FDNY Engine 33 and Ladder 9, ends with the night crew all posing for us in front of a truck with its lights flashing. But when the topic of 9/11 comes up, they simply nod as if to say, keep this conversation going because I'm not going there. This house lost 10 men 10 years ago, and every meal they share together offers a constant reminder of that loss, as a framed set of pictures of the fallen is at the end of their table. They also have plaques near the front of the house for each man lost, and the names of each of them are on the side of the company's trucks. Off camera, when one member of the crew starts telling me about the plans for the 10th anniversary, all of the hair on his arm stands up above prominent goosebumps as he has chills thinking about that day. It's an unforgettable image.
Our artifacts here still have the material from the site on them, I think out of respect for the items and the people who are carrying them.
A similarly strong sense of the loss from the FDNY can be found at the New York City Fire Museum.
It affected the city for a long, long time.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a fire you could see from space.
One room in the almost 25-year-old museum is dedicated to the memory of the 343 firefighters killed. The two cutouts in the center of this memorial represent the Twin Towers, while a picture of each victim is on a tile. All around the room, the painful cost of the attacks to the department are on display.
We're not in any way trying to explain what happened. We don't try to...
You're not glorifying it or glamorizing it. You're just giving the reality of what it is, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's just trying to give a visitor something to sort of grab onto.
We've put out a 10th anniversary shirt, 343, of course, commemorating the number of firefighters lost that day, and then it's 10th anniversary on the back. This has been our best-selling shirt going into this period.
At the original fire store in New York City, people can grab a t-shirt, hat, or almost anything you can put a logo on to feel more connected to the men and women who work in the fire and police department. Before 9/11, the store was popular with fans of those who serve and protect, but that all changed 10 years ago.
Post 9/11, it became about remembrance. It became very somber. You know, for years the store was sad. People came in here and they cried. You know, a lot of them, it was their first time to New York after the events, and coming to the store was their way of helping pay tribute. You know, they put on a shirt or a hat, and it made them feel like they were contributing somehow to a cause.
And while store owner Noam Friedman says he'd never look at 9/11 as a business opportunity, the results of the attack may surprise you.
Pre 9/11, we were the only people doing this. Post 9/11, you can buy these products in bus stations in Sheboygan. We are literally 40% lower sales in 2010 than we had in 2000.
Why? Well, interest in NYPD and FDNY memorabilia skyrocketed in the wake of 9/11, and it wasn't until then that the City of New York officially licensed the logos, changing Friedman's business model forever. But with the 10th anniversary so near, Friedman is a busy man again. Still to come on 9/11 10 years later, the story of a Canadian killed in the World Trade Center attacks, and how his family and friends are keeping him alive.
This beautiful morning, I was sitting there reading the paper and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and Ralph, who normally was very strong-voiced and straight to the point, I detected a quiver in his voice, and he's saying, "Dad, something just happened at the World Trade Center. We either get hit by a plane or by a bomb, and I'm okay, we are okay, we're evacuating, and I will call you later, I love you." Knowing the time was of essence, you know, I said, "Ralph, you know, good luck, and I love you too."
But that call never came, and Hans Gerhardt never heard from his son Ralph again. 9/11 has scarred the Gerhardt family. Hans and his wife Helga drove to New York City from their home in Waterdown the next day, and a few days later they stood among the ruins of Ground Zero.
It was like a view into hell. We stayed there maybe 45 minutes, an hour. You know, it was just like in a movie scene. You know, it was so unreal, and with the smoke and the smell, you know, coming out, you know, from the center of it, and you virtually were in the center of it.
To this day, a picture of Ralph jumps out to anyone who walks by a display of photos and items which were hung on the fence outside St. Paul's Church as the desperate search for the missing unfolded after the towers fell. No one else necessarily even knows he's a Canadian, but it doesn't matter. He's an innocent victim, just like the thousands of others. And just like the pictures of the thousands of other lost loved ones, Ralph's smiling face is there. He's standing under a blue sky in front of the building in which he would later die. Ralph worked for Cantor Fitzgerald and was on the 105th floor of No. 1 World Trade Center. None of Ralph's remains were ever found.
For us, we do love New York because our son is there somewhere.
While they were in New York living at Ralph's apartment, the Gerhards met some of his friends. People like Robin McKenna. They've since become close friends, but the friendship is bittersweet.
It's a strange bond. I remember, I think the first Christmas card I sent them, it was with a great level of sorrow that I was sending it at all, because I would never have met them, I don't think, if this had not happened. Yeah. And so it's kind of, to think of that connection is really sad.
When I think of September 11th, I think of Hans. I think of Helga. And I think of the Gerhard family.
Randy Daniels was the Secretary of State for New York when the attacks occurred. He knew Hans well and even helped him get across the border the day after 9/11. When Daniels talks about the attack, it's clear he's as passionate and honest about them today as he was a decade ago.
The most important thing is that the mastermind of this tragedy is dead. And the president sent U.S. forces to kill him. I'm glad that that happened because it gives us some degree of closure.
We haven't really found closure in the sense where I'm saying, but we do celebrate the moment we had with our son, the 34 young years he was with us, and he was a very loving son, and we had a wonderful communication. So we think of him every day and have thought of him every day, and you can't just miss it. You go through the house, you touch, something and saying, oh, Ralph gave me that for my birthday or whatever it may be.
Hans proudly showed me the candle he and his wife light whenever they want to feel closer to Ralph. It was the last gift their son ever gave them.
I said, Ralph, we need another candle like a hole in the head. He's saying, Dad, this one is special. Whenever you light it, you will think of me. And I guess so, whenever we light this candle, it's still vividly in my mind, when you give it to his mother.
In Gerhard's home office, his walls are decorated with various pictures and campaigns that he ran during his career as a successful hotelier. But he's definitely most proud of the framed images and snapshots of his son Ralph. The loss of his son forced Gerhard to do a lot of thinking. Eventually, it became the impetus for a memoir called Hotel Biz.
It's my life story, really. It starts off at 9/11 and then, through these trying days thereafter. And then through my life, where you ask the questions, why? Why our son? Why me? Is there a God? And if there's a God, how can you let this happen?
And while there will never be any answer to those questions and many more, upon reflection, Gerhard has learned a lot in the last decade. But while the lessons are painful, they're also powerful reminders for all of us.
When you're young, you kind of keep running. When you're busy in your career, you keep on running and do so many things. And until all of a sudden, fate kind of puts a stop sign in front of you and you come to a full stop. And that's what happened to me.
When 9/11 10 years later continues, we'll show you how New York and New Yorkers are recovering from the attacks. 10 years later, New York City is as popular a tourist destination as ever. Street performers dot street corners, giving visitors a chance to have their picture taken next to the Statue of Liberty. Or a water taxi ride can take you right up to the real thing.
Dedicated to New York Harbor in 1886 by President Grover Cleveland.
The water taxi also offers a better perspective of the city's skyline and shows the gaping hole where the World Trade Center once stood and also where the new towers are being built. In Times Square, day and night, the lights flicker and dance on the thousands of people who pass through the area in Manhattan. A cast of characters can always be found here, and of course, members of the police department are ever present and always willing to pose for a picture. And among the street vendors selling t-shirts, food, and more, you can still find reminders of the Twin Towers. You still sell a lot of those?
Yeah, this is very famous.
Yeah, yeah. And there are plenty of other 9/11 related pictures which tourists still snap up. At the foot of Ground Zero, salesmen try to make a few bucks selling commemorative magazines of the event, and it's here Randy Daniels reflects on the day his home changed forever.
No New Yorker will ever forget that day. Every New Yorker knows where they were and what they were doing, and it was the greatest challenge we ever faced.
But in the face of that challenge, the city came together, and people who'd never met before formed friendships that last to this day.
I told him I still had the bike, the pants, the shoes, and the shirt.
People like Robin McKenna and Benny Azareev. He ran into Robin as he was frantically trying to get downtown to pick up his 10-year-old daughter from her school, which was 2 blocks from the World Trade Center. To this day, when he looks at the pictures of the huge dust cloud that enveloped her school, he can't believe it happened.
When both of the towers collapsed, it looked to me as it fell sideways because there was so much dust. And I was just writing down and praying to God that it didn't hit the school.
After asking dozens of people for their bikes, Benny bumped into Robin, who lent him her bike on the spot.
She was all the way somewhere else thinking about this disaster. And she just gave me the bike. She says, go ahead, take it. I gave her the business card, and I took off.
Give him the bike. He gave me his card. He said, if I don't come back, this is where you can reach me. And I quickly looked at the address because I thought, if it's down there, I'm probably never going to see this bike again. But it was in Midtown, so I felt relatively sure that I'd get the bike back. And then off he went.
After waiting 2 hours and wondering if Benny would ever return, Robin spotted him in the crowd of people pouring out of Lower Manhattan.
He was scooting up the West Side Highway. The chain had fallen off the bike. And he thought that he had broken the bike. So he was trying to give me money when he got off the bike, and I realized it was not broken. I said, please, I don't want your money.
His daughter was okay and had been evacuated from her school, but after that brief encounter, they didn't speak again for 6 months.
I was hoping she'd call me, because to me, she actually saved my life. That's how I felt. She gave her whatever she had, she'd take it.
And they invited me to dinner, and I met them, and I've stayed in touch with them ever since. We always speak on 9/11.
They call it their anniversary. It's that kind of bond formed in so much chaos and confusion that makes Daniels proud to be a New Yorker.
This struck at the heart of the family of New York. And so it's very fresh with all of us. As we look at 10 years out, we see the world has changed. We have changed in some ways, but the most important thing is that we did not abandon who we are.
And now it's New Yorkers who are building on the 16-acre plot of land which was once home to the World Trade Center. 24 hours a day, the area is buzzing and banging with the sound coming from the thousands of workers who are focusing on the National 9/11 Memorial, but also on building the new Freedom Tower and other new buildings. Members of the various trades eat lunch and then head back in to do the work, and they all say they're proud to be part of it.
It's an honor of working here. I mean, knowing how many people died.
Is it a little bit different getting up for work in the morning and coming to work here than perhaps some of the other jobs you've had?
It makes you feel like, you're going to work for a good reason, It
was unbelievable that I got chosen to even work on the area. Once I was told that I would be working here, it just really gave me goosebumps because I always wanted to be here,
Dean Keyworth hasn't always lived in New York. He's from British Columbia, but has lived in the Big Apple for 11 years and is now the president of the Canadian Association of New York.
From my perspective, when you move to New York as a Canadian, you tend to keep that affinity with Canada, but you quickly, if you're here for any period of time, you do become a New Yorker by necessity.
The investment banker will never forget 9/11. He was in the middle of a meeting with a group of gold traders in a building in Midtown.
It was terrifying, and there were a lot of people on the phone with people that were in the World Trade Center buildings. It was just hysteria.
But he says in the post-9/11 period, he struggled with the reaction of some Canadians back home who couldn't fully comprehend what had happened to the city he now called home.
When you're here and you're in the midst of it, and you're in the midst of all this loss and grief and pain, and I felt, at least in Canada, maybe there was a more dispassionate view of the events. It was difficult to reconcile those things.
Up next on 9/11, 10 years later, never forget are 2 words you hear a lot in New York, and we'll show you places where people can remember, honor, and heal. In the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, the cemetery at St. Paul's Church across the street from the World Trade Center site was covered with paper and pieces of the Twin Towers. But today it's filled with people touring the hallowed ground who have a chance to remember the incredible work done by the rescuers and thousands of volunteers who showed up to help after the towers fell. More than 1 million people have visited the church in the past decade.
What they're doing is they're making a pilgrimage, and they're trying to put meaning into what that event happened.
The church now has an exhibit featuring a collection of pictures of missing family members which were hung from the church fence, as well as the red chasuble worn during Eucharist services after 9/11, and which a firefighter pinned a patch to, starting a trend which continues to this day. Among the visitors are children not even born on 9/11. It all helps keep the memory of the positive aftermath of 9/11 alive.
Even when the World Trade Center is finished and everything's finished, I can't imagine that this place will ever forget. We've been marked by it forever.
Across the street, waterfalls pour into reflecting pools in the footprints of the north and south towers of the World Trade Center. The monuments and new towers at the site are a message to the world that New York and New Yorkers won't be broken.
It's incredibly important. We said a few years ago that it was not up to us whether or not the world would be checking in on the site on the 10th anniversary. What was up to us was whether we were going to have a memorial that was open, that families could see, that the public who has been wanting to come back here for 10 years could come to, and the fact that we're getting to be in that position is pretty exciting.
It's been an unbelievable 10 years, right, at this piece of land, hasn't it? You've seen it evolve. What's that been like?
It has been incredible. I think this is one of the most sacred places in the entire world, not only because of the loss and the death and the tragedy that happened here, but this was also the place where the world came together in the aftermath to help each other with limitless compassion. So it is an incredibly special place, and to see it restored, to see these trees, to see these pools, it's a reflection that when we need to, we can come together.
You must really be, in a sense, looking forward to the anniversary just to see the accomplishment that 10 years later, right?
Yeah, fundamentally, I'm looking forward to the anniversary. I want to see these family members for the very first time come and place their hands on the names of their loved ones. That's the most important thing to me. And then the next day, on the 12th, to see citizens of the world from all walks of life come here, stand on ground that the public has not stood on in 10 years, and see how it moves them.
I think the memorial site is very, very important for us to remember what happened that day, to understand why it happened, and for us to work as a society and a community of nations to make sure that terror is unacceptable.
But there's been a steep price to pay to try and defeat that terror. The cost of 2 wars to the U.S. Department of Defense is more than $1 trillion and more than 6,200 lives. Canada has spent $11.3 billion on the war in Afghanistan and has lost 157 lives. 9/11 also led to tighter restrictions and slower waits at border crossings and airports. That's a new normal that doesn't look like it will ever go back to normal. But 10 years later, the healing is underway.
All New Yorkers who were here during that period, they walk around with a scar, with an emotional scar. And but more and more New Yorkers are starting to come to our museum now. I think 9-10 years, I think they're starting to confront their feelings regarding this event.
So you can see that life is moving on, especially right here in New York. It will and it has to. But 9/11 will always be an important day because of the impact it's had on our world. It's the day it changed forever, but it is also a day we will never forget. Thanks for watching tonight. I'm Nick Dixon.